I'm Esther, host of Once Upon a Crime. This is part 4 of our series, Ted Bundy for the Defense, where we look beyond the common misconception of Bundy as the charming serial killer who boldly defended himself in court, and unmask him for what he truly was, a sociopath whose narcissism didn't save him. It helped prosecutors send him to the electric chair. In part 3, Bundy's facade began to crack. After years of slipping through the hands of law enforcement in Washington, Utah, and Colorado, he was finally caught in Florida, no longer a shadow in the Pacific Northwest, but a man in shackles, facing the savage reality of what he'd done. And what's chilling is this: even then, he didn't surrender. He played games, he hinted, he teased, he spoke of his problem, and compared himself to a vampire. He claimed he needed to keep the fantasies alive, and yet never gave the full truth. Because Bundy's greatest addiction wasn't just violence, it was control. From the beginning, Bundy tried to control his defense. He demanded Millard Farmer, an aggressive Georgia attorney with a reputation for taking on capital cases and dismantling prosecutions by exposing police misconduct and coerced confessions. Farmer was bold, high-profile, and combative. Bundy wanted a warrior at his side. But Farmer wasn't licensed in Florida. The court denied the request. So Bundy got public defender Mike Minerva instead. And Bundy, who believed he should be directing every scene, was furious. Then there was Sheriff Ken Katsaris. Katsaris had been among the first at the Chi Omega house. He saw the bodies removed. He saw survivors battered and bloody. And once Bundy was arrested, Katsaris made a vow. Bundy would not escape Florida like he'd escaped everywhere else. Bundy was shackled, guarded, and controlled 24 hours a day. He couldn't talk to the press. And Bundy immediately cried inhumane treatment. Not because he was innocent, he knew what he'd done, but because he couldn't stand being managed. He filed a $300,000 lawsuit claiming his rights were violated. It was dismissed. A judge ordered that he be given exercise, however. Katsaris complied by placing Bundy on the jailhouse roof to exercise, high above the ground where escape was impossible. Then, Katsaris secured a warrant to take molds of Bundy's teeth. Bundy was dragged to a dentist's office under surprise guard. Those molds would matter. Bundy hated Katsaris because Katsaris did what Bundy couldn't tolerate. He showed Bundy he was no longer in charge. July 27, 1978. Katsaris staged a public reading of the indictment in the jailhouse lobby. On hand were cameras, lights, and microphones. Reporters were packed, shoulder to shoulder. At 9 p.m., the elevator doors opened, and Bundy stepped out in shackles. For a second, he looked caught off guard. Then the mask slid back into place. As Katsaris read the charges, murder, attempted murder, and burglary, Bundy paced. Anger flashed. He leaned in and read over the sheriff's shoulder. Then he pointed at him. "You told me you were going to get me," he snapped. And then he turned directly to the cameras, because he always needed an audience. "He told me he was going to get me," he told them. The media loved it. Bundy loved it more. "You got the indictment," Bundy said. "That's all you're going to get." He smirked and raised his hand like he was being sworn in. "I'll plead not guilty right now," he said. But then the deputies cut him off. Bundy was denied giving a press conference or even making a statement. He was led back to his cell as cameras clicked away. And you could see it, the frustration. Bundy needed the last word, and for the first time, he didn't get it. By 1979, Minerva tried steering Bundy towards the only strategy that might save his life, an insanity defense. Bundy refused. Insanity meant surrender. It meant admitting something inside him was wrong. It meant losing the narrative. Clinical psychologist Dr. Emmanuel Tenay evaluated Bundy and saw him clearly. Tenay noted that Bundy played verbal games with investigators for the sheer thrill, confessing while maintaining innocence. because the contradiction kept investigators off balance and gave Bundy power. Tenay observed something even more damning. Bundy treated his lawyers like assistants. Bundy was the chief counsel. Minerva was just the associate counsel. Tenay warned that Bundy's need to defy authority would override his legal interests. He was guided by thrill, not survival. Then came the plea deal in May 1979. His public defender pulled off a miracle, a once-in-a-lifetime offer. Bundy would plead guilty to the murders of Lisa Levy, Margaret Bowman, and Kimberly Leach. In exchange, he'd receive life sentences and escape the electric chair. Judges agreed. Prosecutors agreed. Even the victims' families agreed to be spared the agony of a trial. Bundy signed the paperwork. But there was one requirement of the plea agreement that was a bridge too far for Bundy. He would have to admit in open court to murdering 3 women. To do so would mean taking off the mask. It would mean showing the world the real Ted Bundy. Bundy had hidden the truth of who he was from everyone for decades. He was not charming. He was not a gifted law student with a promising career. He was a monster. He was a frightening anomaly, a man without conscience, without empathy, and with a pathological need to destroy. Under the cover of darkness, he entered the bedrooms of women who were complete strangers and maimed and killed them while they were sleeping and completely defenseless. He was a predator and had been so since his youth. He was not fit to live freely in society. Bundy could not and would never admit this. The mask had been too carefully constructed over too long a period. So the next morning, he walked into court with a motion he typed himself, demanding his attorneys be removed. He refused the plea. To Bundy, control mattered more than survival, and the trial moved forward. On June 25, 1979, the Chi Omega trial began in Miami. It was the first nationally televised trial in U.S. history. Bundy turned it into his show. He insisted on serving as co-counsel. He wore suits like a seasoned attorney. He referred to himself as Mr. Bundy. He smiled at reporters and turned towards the cameras whenever he could. But what he saw as brilliance, prosecutors saw as opportunity. And then came the moment that changed everything. Officer Raymond Crew was one of the first to enter the Chi Omega house after the attack. He walked into the carnage. When it was Bundy's turn to cross-examine him, Bundy stood slowly, legal pad in hand, composed and almost gentle. And he asked Crew to describe what he saw upon entering Lisa Levy's room. Crew began clinically. A body, a sheet, blood. But Bundy pressed him. He wanted to hear it, step by step, detail by detail. When the sheet was pulled back, Bundy asked, "What did you observe?" Crew testified there was a puncture wound through the nipple of the right breast, and when Levy was moved, he observed a bloody bite mark on her buttocks. A juror turned pale. She asked for a glass of water. Bundy did not stop. "To the best of your recollection," he said calmly, "describe the scene." He forced Crew to recount the positioning of the bodies, the blood spatter, the twisted limbs, the destruction. Then Bundy moved to the next room, where survivors Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler lay battered, broken, and nearly unrecognizable. Even the prosecutor objected. This was repetitively gruesome. Even Bundy's own attorney objected. Jurors were visibly shaken. Judge Cowart allowed it, and Bundy stood there, outwardly serious. But something else was happening. He wasn't dismantling the state's case. He was reliving it. This was the truth that finally emerged on national television. Bundy didn't ask those questions to help his case. He asked them because he needed to relive the violence he'd inflicted that terrible night in Tallahassee. He needed to control the room, the jury, the victims, and the narrative one last time. The district attorney later said, essentially, you would never want your client doing this. Bundy was highlighting the horror he had left in his wake. And that was the point. For years, the public narrative clung to the myth, the handsome, charming pre-law student. the clean-cut boyfriend, the crisis hotline volunteer. But watching him override objections, watching him extract horror word by word, watching a juror physically react while he continued, that was the moment the mask shattered. The charm evaporated. This is the catalyst for this series, Ted Bundy for the Defense. Because in that exchange, under bright lights with cameras rolling, the public finally saw the real Ted Bundy. Not a paradox, not a curiosity. A man so consumed by control, so devoid of empathy, that he would destroy his own defense just to relive that violence. And from that point forward, the verdict felt inevitable. After that, the prosecution's witnesses finished what Bundy had started. Survivors took the stand and described waking in the dark to a stranger standing above them. Then the wooden club crashing into their heads and faces. They spoke about shattered jaws, crushed teeth, broken bones, and surgeries. The long, agonizing process of trying to rebuild what he destroyed. Jurors didn't hear hysteria. They saw damage, permanent damage. Other witnesses placed Bundy near the scene, students who'd seen him at a nightclub that night and described him as creepy and scary, a man who lingered, a predator. After one especially devastating day, Bundy snapped. The next morning, he refused to come to court. He tried to jam his cell lock so guards couldn't open it. He raged. Dragged into court without the jury present, he threatened Judge Cowart, saying that so far, the court had seen him only demonstrate the, quote, nonviolent part of his potential. Cowart didn't flinch. "Seek and ye shall find. Knock and it shall be opened. Remember that," he cautioned. Bundy shot back sarcastically, "Hallelujah," and then backpedaled with a hollow apology. Even here, he couldn't stop performing. On July 24th, 1979, the jury deliberated only 6.5 hours. Bundy was found guilty on all counts. He gave interviews, smiled at reporters, and repeated his claims of innocence. On July 31st, the jury deliberated only 2 hours and recommended death. Bundy smirked at the reporters. "See you at the next trial," he said. The next day, he was given a chance to speak. For 30 minutes, he berated the media and portrayed himself as the victim. No remorse, no acknowledgement of the dead or the survivors. Judge Cowart called the crimes extremely vicious and shockingly evil, and designed to inflict maximum pain. And he sentenced Ted Bundy to death by electrocution. Six months later, Bundy went on trial again in Orlando for the abduction and murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. This case was even stronger. Receipts traced him. Blood in the stolen van and fiber evidence told a compelling story. Eyewitnesses placed him near the school. Another student identified him as the man who approached her the day Kimberly disappeared. A witness described a man, matching Bundy's description, dragging a girl toward a van. Bundy let his lawyers lead this time. It didn't matter. He was quickly convicted. But during the penalty phase, his narcissism resurfaced. With his girlfriend Carol Boone on the stand, Bundy invoked an obscure legal statute and proposed marriage in open court. She said yes. And just like that, he created another spectacle, another way to exert his will in the courtroom. It was all he had left. But it was a weak attempt. He no longer had control over his very life. On February 10th, 1980, Bundy was sentenced to death again. Bundy was sent to Florida State Prison in Stark, the death house. Years passed. Warrants were signed. Stays were granted and lifted. Courts examined his competence. A judge would later call him a diabolical genius and determine the verdict would stand. The end was finally set. Execution date, January 24th, 1989. With appeals exhausted, Bundy tried a new strategy, bargaining. He offered to discuss other murders if his execution was delayed. Governor Bob Martinez refused, saying the system would not be manipulated and that negotiating over victims' bodies was despicable. Bundy began talking anyway, giving interviews, speaking in the third person, analyzing the killer, describing murder as possession, admitting returning to bodies to commit further degradation on his victims. He offered vague hints about yet undiscovered remains. Investigators recognized the game and called it bones for time. But it didn't work. And finally, even Carol Boone, his most loyal defender, broke. She took their daughter and left. She never spoke to Bundy again. The night before his execution, Bundy gave one last interview, blaming pornography, deflecting responsibility to the very end. He spoke to his mother and apologized. Carol refused his call. He declined a last meal. On January 24th, 1989, just after 7 a.m., Ted Bundy was strapped into Florida's electric chair. Outside the prison, crowds gathered overnight. Some held signs, some cheered. When the current surged, the man who believed he could outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast everyone was finally still. In the end, Bundy's need for control didn't save him. It exposed him. And in that Miami courtroom, when he forced Officer Crew to describe the bodies, the blood, the bite mark, America saw the real Ted Bundy. Not the charming student, not the media myth, but a predator who mistook arrogance for genius and helped convict himself. That will conclude our series, Ted Bundy for the Defense. Let me know in the comments, what moment shattered the Bundy myth for you? For more true crime stories, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you'll be informed whenever we release a new video. And if you prefer to listen on the go, you can find Once Upon a Crime wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Once Upon a Crime Podcast on your favorite podcast app, Spotify, or Amazon Music. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.